it'll all look like. So yeah, look, on that I'll hand over to Sonia, but I will also acknowledge that we have both our team leader governance services, Lorraine, and our risk and claims officer, Isabel, online tonight as well, who are working on these documents closely with Sonia. So thank you, Sonia. Over to yourself.
Oh, thank you, Todd. That was such an informative introduction to our only very short, rich time together tonight. We've got probably another 15 minutes together. So wanting to really hone in on any feedback that you might have to inform our final version of the risk appetite statement. I know it's been provided to you. The team's come back to me with some minor changes in terms of grammar and removing the word "the" before council. So I've made those little alterations. You will get a marked up version that comes back to you after this evening's session. So I'll start very broad and then we'll work our way through each of those risk categories. So I'll just ask, is there any general feedback on the risk appetite statement that you'd like me to understand to inform any further version?
No. So I just had a comment, or it might be more of a question. When we get down to people and attraction of the workforce, we sort of seem to move away from the terminology and then say council adopts a medium appetite. So we've sort of gone back to, I guess, the medium, low, high sort of comments.
Yep, okay. We can hold that and I'll put a comment in there for us to come back to.
Yep.
Any other reflections? Okay, all right, so let us work our way through each of the categories. So what I would suggest, therefore, is we look at each of those risk appetite statement areas, which we've identified as a council we consider we should put parameters around which seek to guide decision making for the future. The first one, and again, this was drafted based on alphabetical order rather than order of priority of risks. So the first risk appetite key risk area was cybersecurity information technology. So seeking to capture the essence of our conversation in the first workshop, we've separated out SITs. So we've got data protection, reputation, IT security, AI innovation and technology advancements. Can I seek any specific feedback on this risk area? If we're all comfortable, that's good. Yes, Councillor, okay.
Yeah, just general comment as we go in rather than adding at each time. I think you've accurately reflected what we talked about when we were together in the workshop.
Okay, thank you so much for that feedback. Very full.
That was a hand down now.
Okay, anything else on that one, or I will move us on? All right, let's move to environmental sustainability. So again, recognising that we've identified in each of these risk areas that we've got contributions as well as our impact. So we sought to, in that workshop, try and capture the essence of this in environmental sustainability. So we've got the categories of climate change contribution, climate change impact, disaster management impact, and then environmental health. Feedback.
The only one, Sonia, the comment on below with regards to environmental health, just the understanding that these risk appetites sort of come with quite I guess, a ramification with regards to the operations of the organisation, and whether council seeks to avoid intentional environmental damage. I think that is almost a given, but whether, because avoid basically means that there's no holds barred with regards to the amount of resources that you will put in to make sure that there is no environmental damage. And in a lot of our operations, that can actually be quite difficult. Like you can put a lot of things in place to, I guess, what's the next level up? It's averse with regards to a small appetite. But if we're going avoid, if I think about that, then we need a container around every single grader's oil plugs to make sure that if the oil plug accidentally falls out, then no oil is going to fall on the ground, because that would have a detrimental impact on the environment.
This one also, though, has the word specifically in there of intentional.
Okay.
So we're not seeking to set out and intentionally cause environmental damage. So we're going to seek to avoid that. So we will, as usual, maintain our equipment. And
Yep.
if a plug did fall out, but we'd maintain that equipment effectively, that's not intentional. Whereas if we, with intent, wanted to build something in our piece of infrastructure which resulted in a rare frog being impacted, that could be regarded as intentionally creating environmental damage, which we know of and we're still taking. So we might avoid that sort of outcome if it's so. I think the intentional, let's open that for consideration. Councillor King, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, look, I think it's sort of a gateway into some of the thoughts that I was having around yeah, I mean, I think with the environmental stuff, there'd be a lot of maybe residents and possible councillors as well that think avoiding the risk would be not spraying herbicides in the town centre. And I'm sort of, yeah, I still don't understand what the implications are for councillors to agreeing to a risk statement when we have very different perspectives on different issues. So, you know, I might be a lot more radical than other people in terms of my concerns around the environmental health. And as Mark said, you know, where does it stop in some way? So I still haven't grasped what this actually means in terms of, if we all agree to it, does that mean whose interpretation of what avoid actually means? Are we basing that?
That's defined in the front end of the document. So let's come back to the whole point that you've just made. Individually, we all have our own individual views on what it looks like to be a councillor and how we'll manage risks. But that's individual. What we're seeking to do is get this collective view on how do we manage risks to give guidance. So your perspective might be that that is a significant risk, and somebody else's might be that it's not. And where we land is in the middle to say we actually are quite averse in respect to that, and we agree that as a team, as a whole. So let's come back to that point around avoid. Mayor, would you like to come in? Because if we need to change this to averse here, then we should do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that given your commentary around the full wording, which says avoid intentional, I was sort of comfortable with where that was landing.
So that is setting quite a high expectation, as we're saying. We're avoiding intentional environmental damage. Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, sorry, I haven't got a visual. I think that I've thought about this a fair bit since we met it before, and I'm wondering, I think where the actual clash is that some things that we've raised aren't defined very specifically, and you know, so saying putting climate change into any of those categories is open to interpretation. So how is that? Yeah, exactly what Councillor King's saying. How exactly do we be clear about what we're talking about? If we're struggling with it, the community's not going to have a chance.
So this is something that you all have to discuss, and that I would suggest it goes back to our first workshop discussion, where if you don't have a shared alignment around what you consider climate change contribution or impact to be, this document's not going to solve that, nor will a risk framework. As you cascade this document down into a risk management framework, you have to have a clear understanding amongst yourselves around the language used in all of this. So what does innovation mean to you is the same as what does climate change mean to you? what is your data, you have to also have a collective view on what your data is and what you regard data to be. Some of you might say that that's only protected information. Some of you might say that's all information we receive from our ratepayers. So I think that applies to all of these categories. So that probably is something that I would say to you, you need to put on the parking lot and have another conversation, that we've got a shared view on the language we're using throughout this whole document, not just related to that one category. So some might say, I don't know what innovation is. For me, innovation is doing something differently. For others, innovation is actually, if you are doing it and we've made an improvement to it, we've innovated it. So innovation also has a range of definitions. So I'm not sure if you've had those sorts of conversations.
Well, I guess that's part of the challenge, I guess.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenny.
Yes, sorry, Mike. I would love to see some data around this before we have to say, yes, this is my risk appetite, because just to reiterate, I'm still not feeling how this all hangs together in the world at the moment.
Okay, so once we've settled this risk appetite statement, it sounds like it's another education session that you need to have working through as a council around your appetite statement and your risk framework and how they tie together and how one informs the other.
Yep.
Yeah. So perhaps if we can take that as an action from tonight as something that you'll do to embed this.
Yep.
Okay. Are there any other reflections on environmental sustainability? Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I'd just like to come back to Mark's earlier example and just support what Steve was saying, that the word intentional, I think, covers that. We're not talking about extreme examples or impractical things.
All right.
I just wanted to log. Yeah, I disagree with Mark's use of extreme examples. I think it covers it in a practical sense.
But I think, all right, Councillor O'Keefe, and it comes back to, I guess I was trying to get away from the example where Councillor King sort of raised it. The use of glyphosate at all is a good example with that. So if there'd be some, and this is probably comes back to that definition stuff that Sonia was just talking about, but some would say that use of glyphosate is environmental damage or creates environmental damage. And by us using that to spray weeds, some would say that's intentional because we're doing it. Whereas if we were to avoid that, then we would need to either go and hand pull all the weeds or whippersnip them or slash them all or that type of thing. And so I guess that's where I was trying to come to, is if we were to do that right across the Shire with all the places that we use glyphosate, the financial impact on our organisation would be very significant.
Mm.
Yep, that's a very good example to trigger this debate. Yeah, that's a good one.
Mm.
So if we were to avoid that, and council said you need to avoid that, Mark, then I'd need to be coming to you and saying, well, if our view was that glyphosate is causing environmental damage, then I would need to work out what the resourcing ramifications of that would be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, I guess that's the point I was making before about data. That's a great example of something that I think that needs to be on the public record in considering risk, because, well, how much area is getting sprayed, for example, as one issue? What are those kind of measures that are of interest, I guess, to the community?
So, Council, this is your document. So it's thinking through that as an example. What you might need to do is take that on notice and say, are we actually better to say here that we're averse to that? And again, you're just going to need to think through what that looks like from a community understanding and a reputational perspective to say council is averse to intentional environmental damage. Is that signalling that so that then talks to, we've got safe options with little risk of adverse exposure. We're willing to invest to reduce unreasonable exposure to uncertainty. So we've got, it's not that no appetite, it's a smaller appetite. Councillor King, and then I'm going to move us on because it might be that you don't get an answer to this tonight, and it might be that you have to take this on notice. So yes, to close us out. You're just on mute there.
Yeah, thank you. It does. I suppose it impacts the whole document in some ways, and I sort of wonder about, how easy this is done in councils in terms of, have other councils had that same issue? Because obviously we bring different things to council and have different opinions and possibly represent different sections of the community. And while I wouldn't be happy for the environmental one to be weakened, it might be that the majority is okay with that. But that wouldn't mean that I still agree with that statement. So that's why I think it gets tricky when you're trying to do that in a political environment where you do have, conflicting ideas of what's acceptable to you in terms of risk and what's not. So I think I don't think we're ever going to land at a place where we all agree. It might be that the majority agrees that the risk statement suits where we are, but there still might be some councillors that go, well, for example, if people came up to me and, I hate to go back onto the glyphosate thing and says, oh, so you're accepting that it's okay to spray that, to broad spray it, I would probably say, no, I'm not, but that's where council is at the moment in terms of where that's managed. So I don't think we're ever going to get to the perfect with this.
Yeah,
so I don't know if that's the aim. If the aim is to when this comes to council, we might vote on that, but we might not all agree on it.
And I think that's like every decision you take, Councillor King, as you've highlighted, that's the democracy of the council that you're in, and you don't all agree on current decisions, and that's the same. In terms of how you might speak to your constituents around, if you use that spraying example, we actually don't have the financial capacity to hand pull or to whippersnip weeds. So that's the position we're currently in. Like it's the resourcing piece, as we've just highlighted, which if you put that to avoid and it doesn't get changed to averse, how are we going to resource that so we haven't got that underlying risk? And so that's where you've got to actually have those discussions. And I wholeheartedly agree. This is a document that seeks to capture the essence of a whole range of risk categories. And for example, financial sustainability, some of us might have a lower risk appetite to financial risk than what others have. So our risk reward equation is never equal as part of a collective decision-making team. This document seeks to give some guidelines around how our executive and management can give effect to council's willingness to spend the limited resources that you have. Okay, I
think, sorry, I know you're trying to move us on, Sonia, but I think that was a good example where when we had the first workshop, I sort of talked about another organisation I'm involved with where they were providing us with reports that said, well, we were constantly outside the risk appetite. And so we then had to agree that the risk appetite was not quite reflective because we couldn't put the resources in to meet that. So this is a living document and it's not something that's set in stone, and we will need to provide information to the councillors to amend this into the future depending on how it goes. This is our first go, and I keep saying progress, not perfection. I wouldn't say we're going to get this 100% right the first go, but it's certainly something that's better than nothing.
And I think that's a great point. It's a living document. And I also think that what we're trying to capture is a recognition that we all haven't got alignment around these interests. And it's often difficult to document how do we resource appropriately. So this document does seek to guide our resourcing, and our team will come back to that. All right. I think our actions arising from this discussion is we've said that there probably needs to be another discussion amongst council themselves around the use of language throughout this whole document. It's not limited to the environmental sustainability category. Is there an understanding around the use of the words like, for example, if we go back to innovation, and then we might say climate change. So we want to make sure we've all got a shared alignment in our understanding. And then secondary, in terms of the environmental health category, do we want to move that from avoid to averse? So I think they're the takeaways before you can settle on an outcome from this conversation. Is that all right? Are we all in alignment with that as a way forward?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just checking who's off my screen. I can't see anybody who's... All right, thank you. So let's come to financial as our next category. Any feedback on this as a category of risk?
good succinct one.
Beg your pardon?
That's a nice succinct
It is.
statement.
Yeah. And so to probably come back to the point that you raised earlier, though, which was around our use of language, we've suddenly gone to avoid. So avoid sits in rather than little to no appetite. It's when we then get down to the next one around medium that we'll talk around, can I change the language around that? But this one still is aligned to averse and avoid. Are we comfortable? That reflects our discussions previously, councillors? Not seeing any hands up for discussion. So I'll move us to the category of people. We've got work health and safety in here, and then attraction of workforce. So work health and safety, we're averse to the risks that compromise, and we're averse to risks arising from situations and or actions and behaviours that may cause physical or psychological harm. Good. Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, I'm not saying anything because it's good, but because same deal. I would like to see what the data is exactly around this issue, not just, it was mostly a handful of people's ideas about what the big risks are. This is one that there's presumably heaps of data about, so I would be interested in that.
Are you currently getting reports up to the council which highlight your work health and safety risks? You get those reports already?
No, they've come off the cycle of the meetings.
Okay. Rightio. So that's a data and reporting piece there for the team to take away as an action. Yes. Am I hearing that that's what people would like?
I guess that the challenge with this one, Sonia, is because councils work a little bit differently, that the council employs one person, being myself, and I'm the person responsible for employing all of the staff and so I guess except through my performance review information that gets provided to councillors that sort of demonstrates and the stuff that's included in the annual report, there's not regular reporting with regards to workplace health and safety stuff because it's considered an operational matter.
Okay.
Unless we have specific projects or programs outlined in our operational plan, and then they'd be fed through in the quarterly report. But otherwise, as Mark said, there's a body of work in the annual report with statistics and programs. And
okay, so I think then if the council is saying that we're averse to risk, there has to be some reporting through that risk management framework or escalation.
Yes.
So that if there is a major risk, that comes to the attention of council somehow, whatever that process looks like. So this is, going to be highlighted through probably your risk management framework, and it will sit there on your risk management framework, as I know it does. So this will cascade through in any event, whatever that reporting framework looks like, to highlight that we are averse and that we're managing our risks appropriately.
Correct. Through the, as I outlined at the start, with the reporting cycle program through the executive team, but also through the Audit Risk Improvement Committee, which then those reports are then tabled through council.
Yeah, great. So that's where it should be coming up. Yeah. So that would be ideal. Yeah. Okay. Good. Does that seek to respond, Councillor Fenton?
I've yet to see, but thank you. Yes, hopefully.
Okay. Well, that's what we've taken as our takeaway. So we'll certainly note that as an action. Let's talk about attraction of workforce. If you've not got any further comments, council members, on work health and safety. So this is where we've said, why have I used the language of medium here? And I was just looking at the drafting, and it's really because by the time I start to say we allow something in this space, it looks a bit odd. But we can actually talk like that and use that language if we want. Mayor?
Yeah, I was just going to say we certainly do get reports through the ARIC minutes on the work health and safety aspects. But also, again, like Councillor O'Keefe said before, I think this does capture the conversation we had in the previous workshop. You know, we're acknowledging that it's impossible to avoid all incidents. You know, stuff happens. So this was, I think, where we landed on that. We're averse to it, acknowledging that unfortunately sometimes stuff happens.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. In terms of that attraction of workforce, I can reword that so it uses the language of.
Well, yeah, I think Sonia explained that well, though. Like, to basically, it's probably a better terminology rather than. Yep. So now that you've explained why, I'll get rid of
when
my
I was trying to
OCD
draft it, I
nature.
was like, oh, you know, it just
Yep.
reads a bit clunky. I'm happy to put
Yep.
it in.
No, that reads better.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering how you'd do it, but
Yeah.
no, I'm happy with that.
Okay. Just checking, has anybody got any other reflections on that category of risk? All right, reputation is our next piece. We've got our community engagement and advocacy and reputation impact in here. Any thoughts?
I reckon reputation is pretty strong at avoid. I'd rather be adverse because I think the amount of money we'd need to put in to avoid any reputational risks would be huge.
Yeah, it's where I landed as a result of our previous conversation, and it's good to check that.
Yep.
Not seeing anybody wants to come in on that one. What about the community engagement and advocacy? That reflects our thoughts as well. Okay. Anybody want to add anything here on the reputation, or are we going to move to service delivery?
Just Andrew
Yep.
here. I agree with Mark. I agree with Mark's comment. Sorry, Graham.
I just, in reading the document, I was just thinking, where do we cover the impact that council decisions have on the livelihoods, etc., of people?
So in what sense? In the sense of the impact that might have on council from a reputation perspective? On
well, you know, I guess it is a reputational aspect in terms of, it's a reputational aspect from the point of view of the council. But what about the impact, is that not part of risk? What about the impact that it has on the livelihoods of people or etc.?
Well, it would come in under various, it might come in under our service delivery. Did we meet the expectations of our constituents? It might come in under the environmental sustainability piece. It could come in under financial. What impact did our decisions have on the financial sustainability of council? Because we've misused our, in our decisions, it's resulted in some funds that have been spent on a project that failed, for example. So what impact would that have to the community? So as a result of that, that might then flow on to reputation, as an example. So it would kind of cascade through all of these things. It's a good example to test through the risk appetite. So when you come together to talk about this as a document, one of the ways to bring this document to life is to say, let's use an example and say, what would, if this was to occur, how would this play out for us, and does this statement stack up? While you're reflecting, I might just bring Councillor O'Keefe here and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, just on Graham's point, I think he's identified a fantastic element that could and should be reflected in the document. Given that it's come up under reputation, I think it could be a third category, and that puts it, front of mind in a sense about what our view is to support, not adversely impact through any of our decisions. The livelihood, the way Graham's mentioned it, I think it would be a great one to add.
I think it will be interesting to hear what category you would then put that under with regards to whether it's accept, diverse, avoid, that type of thing, because it's a bit like as we sort of talked today, Councillor O'Keefe, in when you guys make decisions, you make decisions on behalf of the whole Shire. And if you're impacting 4 people by putting a sewage treatment plant somewhere that's actually going to benefit 13,000 people, do you avoid it because of those 4? So it's a really, I think if you're going to be putting in there specifics about impacts on community members and not the community, I think you're walking a very tight rope with regards to how you would manage that.
Yeah, true enough. Maybe, could I just maybe, sorry, Todd, I'll come back. Sorry, Todd, you go.
I was just going to also suggest that it's sort of mandated at the Local Government Act level also that councils should have regard to achieving intergenerational equity. So policy decisions are made after considering their financial effects on future generations. So I guess at the Local Government Act mandated level, there is an impost on councils to ensure that decision making is considering not just the benefits of the community now, but into the future. And I would probably suggest that this idea of the decisions that impact the community sits at the Local Government Act level under the mandate.
Mayor, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I think it was a really good question, and something to think about further. But I'm also thinking of another example that we will all be familiar with, and that is a business situated on the foreshore that is under scrutiny because it's impacting some of its neighbours. So we would have to be very careful about how we worded this, because we may have to make a decision that impacts the livelihood of that business owner for the greater benefit of the community. So, I'm just not quite sure how you would deal with that from this perspective. I'm sure you all understand what I'm talking about without mentioning it.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm just going to bring Councillor O'Keefe in again.
Yeah, probably. Maybe because the way Graham raised it, could an action be that Graham drafts what he might have had, what he has in mind, and just once we see it written as to what he was pondering, then we'd be able to discuss whether it belongs or doesn't belong, or whether it's realistic, or who supports it or not.
Yes, I think the takeaway from this is we've really highlighted here again. This I think is a really fine balance here that you could tangle yourselves up in knots, because I agree the obligations are set out pretty clearly in the Act. Councillor Shepherd?
Yeah, I don't really quite know what I thought was. It was just my thoughts in thinking around the whole thing. We make decisions that do impact people, and obviously the complete outcome is the total good of the whole Shire and the people of the Shire, but we do impact people. And I just thought, if there's a risk, well, there's a risk there too, isn't there? But now I'm happy to write something, just some thoughts. And we can talk. Obviously, I think we do need to, considering the comments by others tonight, we probably do need to talk through this again. So I'm happy to put something together to add to that. Although I do accept that it's we're walking a fairly fine line here, probably, like in thinking about that. So anyway, happy to put something together. No worries.
That'd be great.
Thanks so much. Okay, so I've just noted that as an action as well. So hopefully we're recording this, but it might be that we have to come back and look at this extra work that we're going to complete following this evening. So let's move then, will we, to our service delivery category? We're all happy to move to that final one. Yep. So this is, again, we've got reputation, asset management, infrastructure planning and development. Any thoughts here? Everybody's comfortable on this one? Okay. So,
Councillor Fenton. Councillor
Councillor
Fenton's
Fenton.
just got the hand up.
Yeah, I was going to add that in regards to development and the risks of development, I mean, we have some that really are risky beyond the current generation. You know, for natural or natural disaster vibes, we're still operating on an old set of rules. I think that's one of the biggest risks we have in terms of impacting the public, is letting them build in areas that we know that our grandkids will see that underwater, for example. Yeah, and I guess on the other hand, development's a great opportunity for to support innovative ideas and make sure that we capture that to attract people out there who want to trial something, you know, want to pilot something here like they often do.
mm. Yeah, and I think this is why that language of allow is that medium appetite. So you're choosing the option that has that reasonable balance between that risk and protection. So hopefully, you know, we're not saying here, we're not accepting, to your point, that the potential benefit, although it's great, we're prepared to, you know, despite greater risk to success, allow things to proceed. So I think we've settled when we had that sort of conversation to say perhaps allow is more aligned to our thinking here. So we do want to understand those, you know, risks and then choose the best outcome.
So I think that's a really interesting point too, because when I read this, I wasn't necessarily thinking about land development when I read this clause either, and I guess I'd like to hear from others. Like obviously, Councillor Fenton has sort of lent on the development word within that. I actually took it to mean more infrastructure planning and development, so the development of infrastructure, but not necessarily land use planning and development of land. So how did others read that? Because if I read that, that's how I'd take it.
That's right, Keith.
Yeah, I read it the way Mark read it, but given it can be read differently, this must be a better statement heading for what we mean in that section.
I can actually bring that land use piece in, Mayor.
No, it's not. I think it's the opposite of land use. I think it's what Mark said. I
Yes.
don't know if it means land use, so we can just change the words infrastructure planning and development.
Do we want it to move to land use as well?
I don't think so, but well, let's hear from others. Yeah.
Mayor, I hear from you first.
Yeah, I also interpreted the same as the General Manager and Councillor O'Keefe. And as far as risk around land management goes, I think we have so many other instruments that control that. I don't think we need to go there here. I mean, it's, you know, that's what an LEP is for. That's what a DCP is for. I don't think it's relevant.
Okay, there was a suggestion in the chat that we could call it infrastructure planning and delivery. How does that land?
Beautiful.
Yep.
I'm happy with that.
So can I just clarify, has the point I've made been captured somewhere? Because it is one of the biggest risks, and to me, how individuals create infrastructure on the property they manage and all sorts of organisations and council, it's like we're running out of land now. This is the bit where we all agree on what the last bits do, you know what I mean? So I think not paying attention to that big picture is a huge risk if that happens. So I'm not sure if it gets under another heading, Mark or Sonia.
Oh, that's what Councillor Fenton, I've just highlighted the disaster management impact. And I guess that a lot of what you just talked about was really about, should we be developing in areas that are going to be impacted by disasters? And to me, what you're sort of talking about there could be covered under the area that I've highlighted on the screen, where it sort of talks about we acknowledge the importance of disaster management and mitigating environmental risks. So that's where I think that may come in. Like if we're doing that, then we shouldn't be allowing development on a floodplain, as an example. So if you put that in context, then also with all the EP&A Act and all the obligations we've got in the planning system, I think that would cover it.
It actually says that we actually will have to invest if we were to allow that. For example, what would we do to mitigate the impact of natural disasters in that area? Would we have a building obligation so that, as we know, it would require the first floor to not be tenantable? So all those things come in. Councillor King?
Yeah, just sort of along that same track. I suppose it does fit into the climate change impact as well. And, you know, like, I mean, I think for us, we're looking at another landfill cell, and where we build that and how high we build that obviously comes into concerns around climate change, which also then fits into infrastructure as well. So, I mean, it's all very much tied in. And I think with climate change, obviously after the release of the paper that we've just had last week, which many people wouldn't have been aware of, but a lot of people who do follow that have sort of been listening to those sort of predictions about what we're going to see in terms of sea level rise, etc., for quite a long time. So, yeah, it means that we've got a lot of thinking to do in terms of our risk into the future, and then where do we sit about our beliefs in terms of what we believe that the climate change impacts will be. So it's a really difficult one. Can I ask you a question as well? Have other councils been through this process at all? Has there been, and have you had the same sort of discussions and issues coming up in those?
Lots of councils have had this work through this process, as well as boards, and all the same matters are discussed because we all have different views on what's important from a risk perspective. So that really highlights the desire to try and, instead of approaching our decision making through that individual perspective, which we can still bring, to also provide some parameters and guidance, like we say, around the key areas and the key resourcing required for the business. So if we're elevating something, to say we're avoiding it or averse to it, and we collectively agree to that. So we had no comments, for example, on the financial area. So we are saying we have an avoidance and a lack of tolerance for fraud and corruption in our business. So if we now find out that we've had somebody fraudulently deceiving our enterprise, we would actually argue we have to take pretty strict steps here. We are going to mitigate that into the future. We'll resource it so this can't happen again, and we need to reflect on the outcomes that might arise. Is this a matter that needs to the police force for, prosecution, for example? So yes, these are not unusual conversations. It normally takes a couple of conversations to land a risk appetite statement. I think the next piece of work that you could do as a team to work together to try and get this over the line is, like I say, work through an example. You've got to seek to give effect to an example that we might see in real life and how it would work to balance off, would this align with the interests of council, and would we actually be able to mitigate our risks in accordance with our avoid, averse, accept that we've put down as our initial thinking.
And I think, Councillor King, you've probably hit the nail on the head in how hard, I guess, the executive's job is to try and work through risk management with an elected body with all the different opinions, because we've got to come at it with a consensus view as an executive. But by having a risk appetite statement, it allows us to give something that gives us the bounds by which basically generally the council's happy as a body to move forward with, because I know you've got a different opinion than another councillor, so whose one do I go by? And this will give us some direction with regards to some consensus view across the whole of the council body.
Okay, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, I could see the value of what you just said, Sonia, about, I guess it's several examples, little mini case studies that staff could have that discussion with us, and that would really identify any issues, agreement or disagreement.
Yep.
Absolutely. So I've changed that to infrastructure planning and delivery, and to just note that conversation started with that question around, what we're doing around land use and how we're mitigating those risks. We said it would be caught up in some of the other areas in the risk appetite statement, and we've also got legal obligations under legislation, which we also need to be mindful of. Okay, so any other reflections on that category there of service delivery? Otherwise, I'll make a call for any final reflections. Councillor Fenton?
Yeah, just to, I guess, look at the commentary around statutory obligations and all that legislation. When we also put the lens over those kind of issues and look beyond the current time, forwards and backwards, you'll see that the resources from the state government and the federal government have drastically dwindled in regards to the support that local governments and other organisations get from compliance officers, even just like training and resources. All of that has been rounded up and whipped off to Sydney. I'm old enough to remember the regional centres and the way that there was so much more support then. So I guess, to me, that's something that we need to be aware of, and saying that's the EPA's baby, or we just do what they tell us, is that they are under-resourced and they do make mistakes because of that. And we see it all the time here. We see it all the time across a range of industries, including forestry. So I actually see that as quite a big risk, is those obligations not being adequately resourced at other levels of government.
Yep. And I think this is the difficulty in all areas, isn't it? Is we have limited funding, and then we see who might be picking up the can on something, and we're not seeing it being done, and our hands are tied as well. So it's really difficult. Councillor O'Keefe? Yeah,
just an overall comment that the conversation the last 50 minutes actually shows how important this whole document is, and I can see the value in Mark raising it to have this discussion, and then the clarity that will come out of it. So I think we've just confirmed this is a really, really important thing that we're doing.
Right, thank you. Okay, team, may I ask if there's any other reflections? Otherwise, I'll hand back to Todd or to the Mayor or to Mark, who would like to close us out. Otherwise, I'll offer my gratitude to you all. It's been lovely working with you. I wish you success on the next step. I'll send through that marked up version with those couple of actions that we've highlighted for tonight for further consideration, and the changes that came through. Thank you all. So,
Thanks, Sonia.
I guess.
Thank you, Sonia, for leading us through it.
Reiterating Mark's, I guess, points that this is a first step at this process, about creating those sort of, I guess, bumper rails or guidelines for us to guide the rest of the risk framework. And so it's something that, we don't want to be a document that sits on the shelf, but something that we can evolve over time. So, yeah, thank you, councillors, for your input. It's appreciated.
Thank you, team. I wish you ongoing success. It was really nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate your time.
Sonia.
See you all. Bye.
So, councillors, we will come back to you. We'll get the marked up version. We'll send that out to you, and then we've got a number of action items there that we'll sort of work through on how we're going to do that, and we'll have another workshop at some stage over the next. Well, the workshop schedule's pretty full for the next couple of months, but we'll try and fit it in the next couple of months, because I think it is important that we do try and nail this down, and then we can sort of work through it. But it's about also coming back with those different examples so we can see how it may work. But thanks for everyone's participation, understanding and willingness to give it a bit of a go, and your input tonight. It's been much appreciated. So thank you.